Hey there, Ancient Mahar here. I'll have more to talk about on codependency coming, for sure. But I just want to concentrate right now on what codependency isn't. Codependency isn't a disease. Codependency isn't, quote, the disease of addiction. Codependency isn't what it used to be referred to back in the 1940s, that you were the to the dependent, to the alcoholic or the drug addict, that you were the to the dependent person that you were enabling. It doesn't work in today's lens that, yes, mental health professionals know quite a bit about, psychologists know quite a bit about, I'm an expert in, for crying out loud. So I've been working with people for 31 years on this stuff through the lens of adverse experience. Codependency is not a disease, not an addiction, not the separation of the word, meaning that when you have codependency, you don't have dependency. Oh, yes, you do. And it comes from childhood, right? So no disrespect or no judgment intended with this. And the other thing about codependency that people really need to know that it's not narcissistic. It's not the same as BPD. It's not like NPD. Codependency is also not defined anymore as just being an enabler. Codependency is not the result of one attachment style versus another. There are different attachment styles within codependency, and codependency is not something that is predicated on one's attachment style. Therefore, codependency is non-existent, as many in attachment theory will argue. So codependency is not centered around or defined by one's attachment style. Codependency comes from adverse childhood experience. It is onset in childhood, and then you develop this unhealthy relational pattern and an unhealthy relationship to and with self because you don't get enough of your needs met or for various reasons. Codependency is also not the same as CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Codependency is not post-traumatic stress disorder. Can people with codependency also have CPTSD? Yes, in some cases that could be very likely. However, it's not accurate, and people in the US especially are getting diagnosed with PTSD after a relationship with somebody with BPD or NPD. And why? Why is that? Well, again, the limitations and the ridiculous nature, APA with the pseudoscience of and hegemony with Big Pharma. Because post-traumatic stress disorder is defined, centrally defined, as one specific really adverse experience. So it's not defined, or traumatic experience. It's not the same as complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's really important to know that, because if you do get a diagnosis of PTSD from a mental health professional, then they may not really be understanding the degree to which and the depth to which codependency is understood through the lens of trauma. So codependency is not a disease. It is not the same as addiction. It is not just that you are the part of codependency because the other person, the borderline or the narcissist, is dependent on you, the way they used to talk about it in the 40s and 50s and whatever, that you were the of the codependency because back then they had it all tied in, like I said, with being an alcoholic or an addict, and you were the person that was the and the enabler of the person that was dependent on you. No, now it's much more than that. So, but I'm here to focus on what codependency isn't. So codependency isn't PTSD. It doesn't cause PTSD. It doesn't even cause CPTSD, but you could have CPTSD with the codependency. How does that work? Well, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, to be clear here, because there's a lot of not clear or correct information out there online, CPTSD has its onset in childhood. It isn't really accurate to say that after the relationship with the borderline or the BP relationship breakup, or after surviving the BPD and NARC relationship trauma in whatever relationship that was, because often for people it's childhood and creates codependency, which is trauma based, and then it's also going to come again, be layered and be a re-traumatizing experience when you're with the borderline or the narcissist. So in those toxic, unhealthy, trauma bonded relationships, you are not the the enabler only of the person with BP or NPD who's the dependent on you. No, it's a trauma bond, and the codependency goes between people with BPD and codependency and non-cluster B codependents, and people with NPD and codependency and non-cluster B codependents. It's erroneous and reductionist and overly simplistic to compare borderline personality or narcissistic personality, which aren't the same, by the way. BP is not a form of NPD. It's reductionist to compare them to like being an alcoholic or a drug addict. And some people, I guess, who've had these issues in their life of addiction, they do give erroneous information because their whole lens of seeing everything comes first and foremostly through their addiction lens and the 12-step group nonsense. Because that's another thing. Codependency, the 12 steps are not the remedy for what codependency really is. And here I'm focusing on what it really isn't, right? So it's important that you hear a little bit more, about what it isn't as opposed to what it is. And I have lots on the channel about what it is. I have more coming. I have a podcast I'm going to get back to on codependency and codependency recovery. You can check for that anywhere online where you might like to listen to podcasts. I have another new podcast coming in it, like if not by the end of today, soon. And you can check for that also at ajmahari.ca, but you can find it wherever, it'll take a day or two to get into the podcast feed. And then, of course, my Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup podcast, which is going to get a little bit more content coming soon than the channel. So you might want to be following the podcast too. And you might enjoy, as many people have told me, they enjoy listening to the podcast because you can really do that on the go. People do that with videos too, but it's easier with podcasts. So anyway, codependency is not what it was defined as initially, many, decades ago, to do with just addicts or alcoholics. But the intergenerational trauma and the nature of codependency from generation to generation, which is childhood woundedness and trauma, to one degree or another, various degrees for different people, it often there might be an alcoholic or a drug addict in the family. But it's not about their addiction in the way that it was thought that it was. It's more that the child of an alcoholic or a drug addict is not going to be getting their emotional needs met. So it comes back more to a trauma-based reality. But that's more about what it is. And here I set out to really tell you what codependency is not. Not a disease, not like an addiction, not a form of alcoholism or drug addiction. You're not the in the word dependency with the borderline or the narcissist, or even if they are a substance abuser or an alcoholic, you're not the to their dependency. You have your own codependency. So yes, codependency does mean that you have learned in childhood unhealthy dependency. So, and when you have codependency, you do not have a healthy or functional relationship to yourself. That's what people need to get into therapy to work on, among a plethora of other things, in what is a complex but doable recovery process from the cluster B relationship and also from codependency itself. Family of origin work, inner child healing, and many more moving pieces. And of course, if you resonate with me, I'm out here to work with you. And you can check for where to purchase sessions at ajmahari.ca. So that's a little bit about what codependency isn't, and I'll have much more coming on, maybe more on what it isn't, and more on what it is.